In the dark corridors of castles and palaces, behind the heavy curtains and polished crowns, there lived queens whose stories history dared not fully tell. Tales whispered in cloisters and taverns spoke of women who ruled not only through lineage, but through seductive power, calculated charm, and scandal that scorched the face of medieval decency. These were no ordinary queens. They were lovers, schemers, manipulators, and sometimes even monsters of desire cloaked in silk and gold. Joanna of Naples was one such woman. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her hunger for power and pleasure that carved her name into the scrolls of gossip. Married 4 times, her husbands never quite lived to see old age. Her first, Andrew of Hungary, was murdered under mysterious circumstances, his lifeless body found hanging in a garden. Rumors swirled that Joanna herself had orchestrated his death to remove an inconvenient man from her path to power. But that was only the beginning. Nobles whispered her visits to male brothels in disguise, of secret liaisons under moonlit terraces, of men bought with gold and discarded like old garments. Even her court was known for its sensual entertainments. Poetry laced with eroticism, dances designed to excite rather than amuse. In a world where queens were meant to be virtuous, she ruled with scandal as her crown. Further north, in the royal court of France, Isabeau of Bavaria raised even more eyebrows. She was striking, tall, graceful, with eyes that seemed to know every man's weakness. She was also deeply political, using her body as currency in a world where women held little else. Her enemies accused her of the unthinkable, an incestuous relationship with her son. The evidence was weak, the accusations likely born from hatred, but the damage was done. The people whispered, the clergy raged, and history took note. Isabeau didn't just tolerate the sensual at court, she encouraged it. Her court became a playground for flirts, dancers, and lovers. Some claimed she kept a private gallery of male portraits, each one of a lover past or present. She wore fashion that flirted with scandal, tight bodices, flowing gowns that clung like second skin. But behind this parade of desire was a razor-sharp mind. Isabeau knew how to deflect attention from politics, using lust as her shield. Her reputation became a mask behind which she maneuvered power, while men underestimated her. Then came Margaret of Anjou, the fierce English queen whom many feared more than they admired. She was no passive consort. Margaret led armies, forged alliances, and fought like a lioness for her son's right to the throne during the Wars of the Roses. But her enemies, mostly men threatened by her power, painted her with the brush of lust and betrayal. She was accused of a passionate affair with William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk. Whether true or not, their closeness gave enemies ammunition. Some even claimed her son, Prince Edward, was the Duke's bastard child. Margaret's name became a dirty word among the Yorkist faction, used to paint her as a foreign seductress corrupting English royalty. She was strong, determined, but condemned for being a woman who dared to love, rule, and desire all at once. Though she lived after the medieval period, Catherine the Great of Russia earns her place in this infamous gallery. Her reign was powerful, her intellect unmatched, but the public memory of her is not filled with laws or reforms. It's haunted by rumors of sexual excess. The most infamous and absurd myth? That she died during intercourse with a horse. A complete fabrication, of course, but one that spread like wildfire. The real Catherine, however, did have many lovers, all younger, all carefully chosen. She had a system. New companions were introduced, evaluated, and if found pleasing, taken to her private chambers. Some were rewarded with land, titles, and wealth. Her taste scandalized male nobles, and in retaliation, they weaponized her sexuality. Historians now believe much of the myth-making around her was orchestrated by enemies jealous of her power. In truth, she was no more licentious than many kings. She was simply a woman who dared to behave like one. What connects these women isn't just their desire, but the fear they evoked. Medieval society was built on control, and the female body was expected to be silent, covered, and obedient. A queen who indulged in pleasure or even hinted at independence threatened not just a crown, but the entire social order. The church preached purity. The state enforced silence, and the scribes, mostly men, wrote damning accounts that often blurred fact with fantasy. Lusty queens made for good cautionary tales. They were symbols of sin, distractions from political failings, and scapegoats for failed kingdoms. But peel back the layers of slander, and you see something different. These women were human, flawed, passionate, ambitious. They lived in cages of gold, but refused to sit still. Their supposed perversions were often exaggerated or invented to humiliate them, to turn public opinion, or to destroy legacies. Some did take lovers. Others used rumor as armor. But all paid the price for stepping beyond the limits drawn by men. In the royal courts, gossip was currency. Chronicles were penned not to preserve truth, but to serve power. A queen's embrace could be rebranded as treason. A pregnancy could spark a war. Even small details, a look, a letter, a smile, could be twisted into scandal. And once branded as perverse, no queen could escape the label. Their reputations would outlive them, echoing in history books and ballads. One must ask, how many of these women were truly perverted, and how many were simply inconvenient? How many used sexuality as a tool, and how many had it used against them? The answers lie somewhere between myth and memory, in the gray space where history becomes legend. As queens played their dangerous games within palace walls, the common people below lived their own versions of passion, sin, and celebration. They drank, danced, and worshiped in ways that shocked the clergy and amused nobility. Because while the elite hid behind curtains and protocol, the masses found ways to let loose in the open. And as winter arrived and the snow kissed the rooftops of cathedrals and cottages alike, a different kind of fever took over. One not of lust, but of laughter, food, and wild traditions that stretched back to ancient times. What queens whispered behind closed doors, the peasants shouted in the streets. Because even in an age of war, plague, and repression, joy found its way through song, wine, and celebration. The story of medieval passion doesn't end with queens. It continues with the people who lived in their shadows, those who found pleasure in festivals, who honored old gods beneath the symbols of new ones, and who lived lives bursting with secret joy and forbidden rituals. What came next wasn't royal scandal. It was something older, wilder, and deeply human. A celebration that once turned the world upside down. In the cold heart of winter, when the fields lay barren and the winds howled through crumbling villages, something extraordinary stirred in medieval Europe. It wasn't just a chill of December or the way to survival. It was a celebration so wild, so free, that even the rigid chains of religion couldn't contain it. Christmas in the Middle Ages wasn't about silent nights or holy hymns. It was rowdy, raw, and bursting with life. For 12 days, people cast off the burden of their daily lives and surrendered to feast, laughter, and chaos. It was the one time of year when a peasant could mock a priest, a servant could rule a lord, and even the holiest of nights felt delightfully sinful. This season was not for the faint-hearted. At the center of the madness stood the lord of misrule, a commoner or jester crowned in jest to preside over merrymaking. He led torchlit processions, drunken chants, and mischief that would shame a tavern brawl. Respectable clergy watched in horror, as their cathedrals filled with bawdy songs and blasphemous jokes. Yet no one stopped it. Not really. Even bishops joined the laughter behind closed doors. People wore animal masks, dressed as bishops and popes, and paraded through towns in drunken parody of the very faith that ruled them. It was dangerous fun, and that was the point. For a brief window each year, order was flipped on its head. Feasting was at the heart of it all. Tables groaned under roasted boar venison, pudding soaked in ale, honey-glazed birds, and dark bread spread with animal fat. Ale flowed like water. Even the poorest scraped together something extra, saving coins all year for salted meat or a rare sweet. Rich lords threw open their halls, if only to show off. Minstrels sang songs, some sacred, others full of lewd double meanings. Games followed, dice riddles, and kissing under evergreen garlands, an early form of mistletoe flirtation. The laughter echoed into the cold night, louder than church bells. But where did this madness come from? Long before nativity plays and Christmas carols, December belonged to Saturn. In ancient Rome, Saturnalia reigned, a festival honoring Saturn, god of wealth, time, and liberation. It began on December 17th and lasted nearly a week. Roman citizens abandoned their duties. Slaves were treated as equals or even masters, and gift-giving became the norm. Temples overflowed with flowers, music filled the streets, and inhibitions vanished. Sexual freedom was not just allowed, but celebrated. Masks covered identities, turning proper matrons into laughing, dancing rebels. Men wore women's clothes, and vice versa. The spirit was one of inversion, chaos, and pure human release. Gambling, usually illegal, became widespread. Dice clattered across temple floors. Children received wax figurines. Adults exchanged tokens of affection and mockery. Courts and schools closed. Food overflowed. Slave owners served their slaves, who were allowed to mock them in the flickering light of oil lamps. Society became a mirror turned upside down, and everyone loved it. No king, priest, or general was safe from mockery. For one glorious week, the world forgot its hierarchy. When Christianity spread, it couldn't erase Saturnalia. It did something clever instead. It rebranded it. The church moved the birth of Christ to late December, aligning it with pagan festivals. Priests denounced the old ways while secretly adapting them. The Lord of Misrule replaced the Saturnalian mock king. Feasts were moved from temples to halls and cathedrals. Gift-giving remained. So did the spirit of temporary madness. Medieval Christmas wasn't a celebration of purity. It was a compromise, a fusion of sacred and profane. Even today, echoes of Saturnalia survive in our customs. Lights in Winter presents Kissing Under Greenery. It all began with pagans dancing in togas beneath Roman stars. While the rich feasted and the poor played their parts in this upside-down world, another figure walked quietly in the background, carrying a different kind of power. The medieval midwife, unseen in royal portraits, absent from historical scrolls. She held the lives of women and babies in her stained hands. In a time when childbirth was often deadly, the midwife was both healer and gamble, miracle worker and suspect. She was trusted and feared. Her tools were simple: cloth, herbs, amulets, whispers of prayers, and decades of passed-down wisdom. There were no hospitals, no pain relief, no doctors for women of low birth. Only the midwife. She wasn't educated in universities. She learned from her mother, her aunt, or another older woman in her village. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, womb to womb. She knew the positions of the stars, the right time to cut a cord, the plants to stop bleeding, the chance to ease labor. Sometimes she doubled as a herbalist, preparing tonics for fertility or protection. Sometimes she acted as priestess, whispering Latin blessings beside blood-stained beds. And sometimes, when the baby didn't survive or the mother screamed too loud, she became the first suspect in dark whispers of witchcraft. The church viewed her with suspicion. She operated in female spaces, outside male control. She understood the body too well. When things went wrong, they blamed her. If a baby was born deformed, the midwife had surely invited demons. If a woman died, it was her fault, not fate. Some were tried, some tortured, some burned, not for crime, but for being close to life's most dangerous moment. A few carried hidden books, written in symbols or faded ink, filled with secrets. Others trusted only their memory. They had no certificates, no titles, only results. A good midwife could become famous across towns. A bad one could vanish without a trace. But they were more than birth attendants. They were the first line of defense in a woman's world. They helped girls hide unwanted pregnancies. They advised on love potions, handled menstrual mysteries, treated infections too shameful to speak of. Some offered abortions in secret with herbs and prayers. Others delivered babies in the dead of night for women whose lovers wore wedding rings not meant for them. In a time when men controlled law and sword, midwives controlled blood and birth. Their lives were brutal, messy, and essential. They carried stories in their fingers, histories in their silence. They stood beside queens and beggars alike, watching life crawl into the world and death stalk its edge. They were never honored with statues or songs. But without them, no kingdom would have grown, no air would have drawn breath. As the festivals raged in the streets, as the lords of misrule danced in wine-stained robes and peasants kissed beneath burning torches, the midwife moved quietly through alleys and barns, cradling life in trembling hands. The world cheered the absurd and the obscene, but she faced the most profound truth of all, the beginning and end of everything. The story of the Middle Ages wasn't just written in battles and coronations. It lived in scandalous chambers, in drunken festivals, in secret births and whispered remedies. From the perverted pleasures of queens to the pagan roots of sacred holidays, from the chaos of Saturnalia to the fierce compassion of midwives, history was never clean or polite. It was flesh and fire, laughter and fear, ecstasy and agony. It was life, raw and unfiltered. And perhaps that's the greatest secret of all. Not that the Middle Ages were dark, but that they burned with color, noise, passion, and untamed humanity that still echoes through every candlelit carol, every clink of wine,